Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and I'm pleased to have as my guest this morning, Manny Alicandro. Um, I met Manny, I can't recall exactly how I met Manny, but my best guess is I probably met him at some crypto conference. Um, and we've had a number of conversations. In one of the conversations I had with Manny, I discovered that he was a volunteer in 2020. He was a volunteer and a lawyer for Trump. He had volunteered for the Trump campaign, I guess, to have some role in the efforts to oversee that these were fair, free elections. Given the fact that I've done another podcast with Bruce Fine talking about election integrity, I thought I would bring Manny on because he actually had a role in the 2020 elections and had a role in a jurisdiction, Philadelphia, that was one of the contentious jurisdictions. And so Manny has firsthand knowledge, and I thought it would be great if he had the opportunity of sharing that. I also so I would like him to talk about. So Manny, I guess at the time you were a lawyer for Trump. You were a Trump supporter at that. What made you interested in participating in the 2020 elections as a volunteer and lawyer for Trump?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it. So I was very active and interested in Trump going back to 2016. So I was a Trump supporter. I'm not a Trump supporter today, which I know we're going to get into in detail. But I felt like I really wanted to do something. Now, I'm a New York lawyer, so
What inspired you? Sorry for interrupting, but what inspired you about Trump in 2016?
I was looking for someone who was anti-establishment. I mean, my frustration has always been the establishment. The establishment bureaucracy creates barriers of entry. So I'm always looking for anyone who's interesting, who's a disruptor, who's disruptive, who has the ability to take a wrecking ball and knock things down and rebuild things up the right way. I thought that was Trump. I kind of, bit the bait, right? I fell into that description, that euphoria about Trump, that Trump was going to create this disruption. I didn't realize, albeit create chaos and act, unconstitutionally. But that's, something we'll get into later. But initially, what attracted me was this anti-establishment, someone who was not an insider politically, right? Someone who was not from the swamp.
Well, I in numerous of my talks, I always said that 2016 was the year of the anti-establishment candidate because during the 2016 primaries, actually Bernie Sanders got more votes than Hillary Clinton did. What Hillary Clinton had was all the super delegates. So given how the Democrats nominate their candidate. So amongst the two anti-establishment candidate, because I would consider Bernie an anti-establishment candidate, what made you prefer Trump's form of anti-establishment versus Bernie Sanders' form of anti-establishment?
Well, in addition to being a lawyer, I consider myself to be an entrepreneur, although some might disagree with me. But I support entrepreneurs and I support entrepreneurship. So I'm pro-business, and I think that Bernie is anti-business. Burn down the house, burn down the city hall. Who's going to pay for stuff? I mean, who's going to pay the taxes to fund all the social programs that Bernie wants to have? So Trump, to me, was pro-business at the time and had the support of the business community, like Carl Icahn and others. Ken Langone supported Trump.
So it's fair to say that at the time of the 2020 election, because 2016 you had hopes that Trump would be the anti-establishment candidate that would finally do something to, quote, drain the swamp. That was your hope and your expectation that we would have a pro-business, pro-property rights candidate who was anti-establishment, and that would, quote, drain the swamp, and that was your hope, and it was your hope and maybe your expectation as well. So 2020 comes around. At the time you volunteer, what was your attitude towards Trump after experiencing 4 years of his governance?
I figured he deserved 4 more years, right? I mean, it's hard to knock something down and rebuild it in 4 years, right? Usually a lot. I majored in political science in undergrad, so I'm a huge presidential aficionado, or a president file, or whatever you want to call it. So I follow presidents and presidential administrations. I mean, usually a lot gets done at the end of the first term into the second term, although it's lame duck. But I figured Trump needed a second term to really carry things out, albeit I wasn't happy with COVID response, and there were a lot of weird things that were going on in the Trump administration. I felt that Biden was equivalent or akin to me to Bernie Sanders, just wearing a different suit.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth. So it would be fair to say 2020 that Trump had not met all your hope and expectations, but you were hoping another 4 years that he would get there.
Yeah, I figured. Look, again, it was almost a lesser of two evils, right? Which I know we're facing right now. A lot of people are considering the choices in terms of, it seems like it's a vote for Trump or a vote against Trump. I figured Biden was just swamp. He was in government 50 years. And I had a lot of respect for Biden before 2020. And I thought he was an interesting politician. He had a really interesting background. I wasn't a big fan, but I wasn't as opposed to him as I was as a presidential candidate. He went extremely left. He went far left. He went socialist. So I figured Trump versus Biden, I had to support Trump for re-election, and that's why I volunteered for Lawyers for Trump.
So how was the process? Who do you contact to become? How do you get to what you got, a volunteer, and why did they send? Your residency is New York, I guess. Your law license is in New York, correct?
Yes. So I reached out to the campaign.
You can't
about
practice
volunteering.
law in Philadelphia. You can't practice law in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania.
Correct.
So
I cannot. So what happened was,
how did you reach out? How did you reach out to the Trump campaign? How did you get involved?
So I reached out to a couple of people in the campaign, and I said I was interested in getting involved. And because I lived in New York, and New York is such a liberal state, obviously my first choice was to do some type of volunteer work in New York. And it really wasn't, because we knew, and like we know right now, New York's a far gone conclusion to vote for any Democratic candidate forever, right? So there was no consideration to ever volunteer in New York from a practical perspective. So Pennsylvania is always obviously a key state, as it is right now. And I work with the campaign to make sure that, because I'm a New York lawyer, we were concerned about the unauthorized practice of law. And Josh Shapiro, who was the attorney general at the time and the district attorney in Philadelphia, were very aware of what we were doing, and made sure that we had to work really under the supervision of Pennsylvania lawyers. So we really couldn't do anything without Pennsylvania lawyers being involved. So we were just pure volunteers, and we went to poll sites. We couldn't do anything from the legal perspective, obviously, because we weren't authorized to practice law. We didn't do any pro hac vici motions at that point. So we were just there to kind of support the efforts and support the team in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia specifically, that was comprised of Pennsylvania lawyers. But the Lawyers for Trump was essentially a composite of lawyers from around the country who were Trump supporters.
And how big was the legal team in Pennsylvania?
There was around a couple hundred people at the time. So we met. We had a couple of trainings, and then we met, and we had a kickoff session, and it was interesting. And then we all went to a hotel to meet for the first time, and then assignments were created, and teams were created, obviously under the rubric of complying with the rules of professional conduct, and within Pennsylvania, again, making sure that we were all doing the right thing in terms of that we weren't falling into this unauthorized practice of law situation in Pennsylvania, which clearly none of us wanted to do. None of us wanted to do either intentionally or unintentionally. So we made sure that that was absolutely done, by the letter of the law, dotting our I's and squaring our T's.
So what was your assignment, and what were the types of assignments that other lawyers were given in preparation for the 2020 election?
Sure, it's a great question. So I was assigned to go to some poll sites and to kind of make sure that everything was okay at poll sites. There were no issues within public polling sites, so that I could actually enter. Now, in addition to lawyers not being able to obviously practice law in jurisdictions where they're not authorized, Pennsylvania, like any other state, has strict requirements in terms of poll watchers. So we work with poll watchers as well, and poll watchers had to be clearly Pennsylvania residents. So we weren't able to go into certain poll sites without poll watchers. General poll sites that we were able to go into, we went into, or canvassing around the area, making sure there were no issues with signage, there were no issues with people who weren't able to vote, people that were turned away from voting, and that kind of thing.
So were you in direct contact with poll watchers, or at least the group of lawyers that you were working with?
Yes.
There was direct communication with poll watchers?
Correct. We had meetings with them frequently. We had a lot of meetings and communications with the team. So we had smaller teams, and then we had the overall leadership team. So we were in close communications with all of them. Some of the volunteers as well were involved in drafting. Right, they were Pennsylvania lawyers. They were involved in contemplation of some drafting of litigation that was forthcoming.
And what kind of irregularities did you think were the lawyers who were legally able to represent the campaign because they have a law license in Pennsylvania, along with what the poll watchers were observing? What was the feeling during that day as they began to watch the votes and observe what was counting and the mail-in votes and other things? What were some of the concerns about the legal teams about the irregularities that needed to be reported and adjudicated and made people question, including maybe yourself, the integrity of the Pennsylvania election?
It seemed that the real issue in Pennsylvania, especially in Philadelphia, was the absentee mail-in ballots. So the campaign, from my recollection, seemed to be comfortable with the fact that Trump was doing well in Pennsylvania, and believe it or not, was doing well in Philadelphia. The concern was the campaign didn't really know how many of the mail-in ballots came in and how those mail-in ballots were going to be scanned in and how those mail-in ballots were going to be counted. Now, remember, this whole issue about mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania, right, went to the Supreme Court, and Alito, right, Alito was responsible geographically, or is responsible for Pennsylvania, and he ruled that absentee ballots should be cast aside, right? So there was this question, confusion, and ambiguity about the admissibility, right, in terms of counting these absentee ballots, when the absentee ballots are received, how they're marked, and when they're scanned in. Right? Obviously, you need to take into account all of the dates, the date on the ballot, the date it's mailed in, and the date it's received. Right? So there's a couple of different considerations when it comes to absentee ballots, right? And mail-in ballots. It's not like you just mail in a ballot a month after the election and it's counted. The ballot has to be completed correctly as well, right? So there has to be specific criteria on a ballot in terms of signatures, in terms of your address, right? So you have to be a registered voter. So there has to be numerous levels of validation. So in addition to the mailings and the dates on the mailings, right, there also has to be a complete and accurate ballot. If the ballot is not complete or has any confusion, ambiguity, whatever, it should be cast aside.
Well, so the observers are there to check to make sure that the ballots are validated and meet the criteria of a valid ballot. Is that true or not?
Correct. The problem that we faced, that's usually the case. The problem that we faced were there were thousands, tens of thousands of ballots, and the poll watchers literally had to stand behind a barricade, and this is public knowledge, that to stand behind a barricade with binoculars. They were allowed to enter. So the main area where all this happened, where all these ballots were being scanned in, was at the Philadelphia Convention Center on 16th Street and Arch, right by the Reading terminal. That's the epicenter of in Philadelphia where all this happened.
Well,
So
that's the reading is. Is there any ability for? And I'm sorry for interrupting you, but is there any ability for a poll watcher to? Where can the poll watcher observe chain of custody, and where do they have no observation of chain of custody?
That's a great question. From my understanding, the ballots were already in that room. I'm not quite sure how they got there. So they were being scanned in. So the poll watchers were watching behind a barricade, probably 6 to 8 feet away from these scanning machines. And there were these bulk scanning machines that were scanning thousands of ballots. And again, poll watchers had binoculars. They weren't allowed to be any closer than behind literally a barricade. Now,
let me ask you, when the ballot comes in, okay, and I might have some ignorance about this, so correct my ignorance, okay, because I'm trying to be as precise as possible. So this is an educational and a civics lesson for everyone, including myself. Okay, now, since the ballot is supposed to be an anonymous ballot, so you don't have to identify, and an envelope is checked, and the envelope is supposed to have some information, and then the envelope, when it's checked, it's proper, then there's a separation of the envelope from the ballot itself. Is that correct? Or
correct.
Okay.
That's correct. In Pennsylvania, there's actually 2 envelopes. There's the outer envelope and the inner secret envelope.
Right.
All of which comprise the chain of custody. None of which should be destroyed. Right. So in terms of
let's just get to the structure. I just want to, when you were seeing the envelopes, when you were talking about being scanned in, when they're scanning in, is that the outer envelope or the inner envelope that's being scanned? Are you at that point validating the voter before validating the vote, or what is the observer observing both?
So my understanding, again, I didn't have firsthand observation, right? So I wasn't there. I wasn't allowed on the floor. My understanding from the poll watchers behind the barricade with the binoculars was that we had already gotten to the point where the ballots were in boxes in the room to be scanned.
Okay.
They didn't observe the envelopes. They didn't observe the envelopes in which the ballots came from.
Okay. Okay. So 2 envelopes, what you were watching, the scanning of the ballot itself, not the reception of the envelope itself, where the ballot emerges from that envelope. So you don't know
Correct.
whether there's anybody, so you're not quite sure of really what an observer gets to observe with respect to chain of custody of the arrival of the ballots to be counted, and whose hands they go through, and how they get to the point where they get scanned and counted. So the only part that you can attest to is that there were observers behind the screen with binoculars looking at that point in time, only the ballots being scanned themselves, not looking at the envelopes, validating that those envelopes have been validated properly. Is that a fair summary?
That's correct. And
Okay.
that's absolutely correct. And what has been represented to me by a couple of the poll watchers was that they had heard that the election workers were instructed to destroy the envelopes. So there were questions asked by the campaign, by the poll watchers, to see the envelopes, and the poll watchers were told the envelopes do not exist, they've been shredded.
And is the law explicit on how the envelope should be treated?
Absolutely. Election law is state law, right? So people misconstrue this and get this confused. So even as a presidential election, so it's a federal election, the amount of signatures you need to get on the ballot, what the ballot looks like, all the election law is specific to a state, pretty consistent throughout all the states that I'm aware of for mail-in ballots in terms of the chain of custody, as you mentioned earlier correctly, the envelope is a fundamental component of that because you can't make a determination. I mean, a ballot is going to be dated when it's dated, right? You're going to date the ballot election day before election day, but you could mail it, 3 days later. So should that ballot count? No, that ballot should be cast. The ballot shouldn't count, but in accordance with the ruling from Alito, at a minimum, to be super conservative, that ballot should have just been cast aside, meaning that there should have been some kind of legal discussion or whatever to determine, how do we treat these ballots that come in after election day?
So when he said he cast it aside, did he mean that it should not be counted at all, or they should be cast aside to figure out what due process they deserved if they were questionable ballots?
They should have been cast aside, put aside to make a later determination of how to treat them. So whether they come in or they come out effectively, right? They're either included or excluded. But I'm not aware that evaluatory process was done with any of the ballots in Pennsylvania. My understanding is that all the ballots that were there were scanned in. Now, that raises a ton of questions about, potential ballot harvesting, where these ballots come from, how many ballots did they have. What was also surprising to me was, if you remember, for a while, and I was there for a couple of days. I was only supposed to be there for 2 days. I was probably there for a week. I got COVID. It was a difficult couple of days for me, suffice it to say. But if you remember, there was a camera that was on 24/7 on that floor at the Philadelphia Convention Center where those ballots were being scanned in. It was a shot, right? It was just a static shot of a camera, right? But for some reason, which we could kind of guess maybe why, but my understanding, there were shift workers working there. So you work 12 to 8. I come in at 8 o'clock. You're gone. I start, right? There were periods of time where no one was on the floor. And that raises questions that why weren't those ballots constantly being scanned in by the election workers? Why were people gone for hours? Why? What was the point of people?
What questions does an observer get to ask? And at what point can the lawyers intercede and seek some sort of injunctive relief or something with respect to what's going on that day in Philadelphia? Because I'm not going to have you speculate on what's going on elsewhere, just what you have specific knowledge of.
Sure. So I mean, the election, worker, the campaign, could have gotten involved very aggressively, very early, and kind of gotten involved, trying to figure out what was happening, and gone to court and gotten injunctions. My understanding was, again, this is from what I heard from people, that the campaign wasn't aware that the envelopes were shredded, were going to be shredded.
Well, at that point, it seems to me, and this is a policy issue. I've had this conversation, this debate with many people. One, I don't know how anyone can identify a ballot that's been harvested once it's thrown in with everything else. So there's no fingerprint. I don't know how you can identify harvested ballots from non-harvested ballots, because there's no separate place to deposit harvested ballots. So it seems to me that if harvested ballots have not been caught in advance, it seems to me they're going to get caught because you can't really identify them. So then the question is, do you just disenfranchise? If you have, just for example, if you have 100,000 ballots in one drop box and 10 of them are harvested, okay, do you disenfranchise every vote in that drop box because you saw 10 people drop in a harvested ballot that you really can't identify which one of them are? And I'm not even sure. Let's say that a ballot is illegally harvested. I'm not even sure whether the remedy would be that you don't count the vote. I mean, maybe the remedy might be you put the harvester in jail. But the question is, if you had 10 citizens who actually voted, who illegally gave that vote to somebody to deliver on their behalf when they should have done it themselves, the question is the right remedy to disenfranchise somebody who actually did vote and was illegal and was legal. So we never got to see the courts rule on these issues because because we never got that far. Because again, we couldn't separate out harvested ballots separately, so we can't know who the harvester was and whose ballots were harvested because they're mixed in and commingled with everything else. So if we could have, and there would have been a fingerprint, it might have been an interesting thing to see how the courts would rule, whether they would disenfranchise a voter because they gave somebody else to deliver their ballot, if the remedy of that would be to disenfranchise the voter. That's sort of like a death penalty, to me, but ultimately the courts can decide on that. So we have a situation now where it seems like the Trump campaign, for whatever reason, did not seek an injunction, and now you have all these envelopes destroyed. So the only evidence that you have of people's votes are the ballots themselves, because the envelopes don't exist anymore. So with respect to being able to look at chain of custody and validate signatures and validate all the information on the envelopes, there was the deprivation of that opportunity to do so. Is what I'm saying a fair summary of everything I just said? Is there anything I said you disagree with?
No, absolutely. I mean, I just want to kind of talk about it a bit further, right? So what could have been done? Now, again, my understanding was that, so now you have another level, right? So think about this, like, remember the old Get Smart show? It's like and you come to the glass, and then the glass goes up. Then you go to the next, then you go to the next level and the next level, right? I know I'm dating myself when I talk to younger people. They're like,
code of silence.
The code of silence, right? Exactly. We should bring that back. I think we need that. It would help with a lot of the social issues that we face. So people eavesdropping on each other. So the second level of Get Smart, it should have been validation of the signatures or of a check of the voter to the list of registered voters. Again, this is what I'm hearing. I haven't witnessed it firsthand. This is all anecdotal from what I'm hearing from people, was that the scanners, these high-powered scanners, the sections that should have provided validation or a check of verification, let's say, of someone's signature, that it looked to be the same signature. So, there's something called a buff card, right? When you go to register, you sign up. That's called your buff card. That is your kind of template that everything is checked to: your name, your middle initial, your address, and most importantly, your signature. I'm not sure to what extent that was being done in the scanners. If those sections were enabled, meaning that the verification of validation of those criteria were met, which is huge, right? So okay, we got past the dates, fair enough. But if people are voting who are not registered to vote, if people are voting more than once, if people are voting under fictitious names or whatever, there should be some type of validation. Jeffrey Wernick can't vote if you're not registered to vote, or you're using someone's name, right? A fictitious name. So those are the things that the campaign could have sought, in addition to take the machine, to get the voting machines and the scanning machines, and validate the programming in the scanning machine. Now, I'm not talking about Mike Lindell stuff, right? I mean, that stuff is just kind of weird, kind of nonsensical, crazy stuff with what he was alleging, and he was on Fox and Newsmax and all that stuff. That stuff's just totally bizarre and out of left field. I'm talking about real questions about the scanners. What went into the scanners? How were they coded? What did the scanners check for? Or did they check for anything, right? I mean, those are fundamental questions. What troubled me the most was Trump was the president, right? Trump had the attorney general, report to him. But where was the Justice Department in this whole process? Why did it have to come down to the campaign litigating? That it litigated over like 60 times unsuccessfully. They were pretty pathetic cases that were filed. Rudy Giuliani was involved in a lot of them, unfortunately. There was never an allegation of fraud claimed in any of the over 60 cases.
I think that's important for people to understand, that they never did file any sort of, under oath, none of them have ever made any statement of any allegation of fraud.
Rudy did all these press conferences, fraud. Every other word out of his mouth was fraud. Yeah. But actually was pro hoc vici, because obviously Rudy's a New York lawyer, was pro hoc vici means you're admitted for that particular case to practice law in that state. So Rudy was pro hoc vici in Pennsylvania, had oral argument of one case, right? Was on many cases, but at least one case went before a federal judge. And I'm pretty sure the judge was appointed by Trump. And the judge asked Rudy during the oral argument, counselor, you are essentially in your legal filings talking about fraud, but you don't have a pleading, you don't have a claim for fraud. Would you like to amend right now on oral argument? You could change the papers later, subsequent, you could amend your filing. Would you like to include a pleading, a claim of fraud? And Rudy said, no, Your Honor.
Okay, so to get a couple of things, and again, we're going to get back to the issues of the irregularities, but I want to make clear, what your statement are clearly irregularities in the system that we should not have. And I'm going to also get to audience questions. But, and those irregularities are important that we discuss so that we each can trust the election of outcomes better. But when it came to filing of the 61, 62, I've heard 61, I've heard 62, so I don't know which is the right number. Of the filings made, my understanding is about half were never heard because of lack of standing, but there was another half that was actually heard and just deemed nonsense. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
Correct.
in the revelations of part of the testimony, the alleged testimony that Smith has presented is a quote that has been I forget who it's been attributable to, but basically saying that they were losing all the cases because they had no evidence. And that was one of the people, I think it was Jason Miller, it's been attributable to, but again, at this point, it's just, that name is not revealed, but that's who people think it's made. It was Jason Miller.
Look,
they were losing the cases because they had no evidence to win a case. And that in spite of the fact,
they had no evidence.
Go ahead, Manny.
No, and they, exactly the point. They had no evidence, and also, they were asking for wholesale the courts, these judges, to disenfranchise thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of voters for these alleged tainted votes in terms of issues that either the ballot came in late, whatever you want to call it, the voting irregularities with regard to a certain ballot. They were asking writ large. So to your point. Let's say there were problematic ballots, they couldn't identify them specifically. So they asked for thousands of votes to be cast aside, to be disregarded, and votes to not count. And there's no court, whether a judge is a liberal, Democrat, conservative, Republican, appointed by Trump, Obama, Biden, whomever, no judge is ever gonna, rule in favor of disenfranchising voters who voted correctly with integrity and honesty and met their civic obligation and had feelings behind it for the questions that we're talking about right now without any evidentiary corroboration.
Yeah, and pretty much right now the Republicans are arguing in many jurisdictions that a ballot with a small technical flaw, had no ability to be cured. It just should not be voted. So let me get this clear. I do a homework assignment. It's my final exam. I don't dot an I, The teacher comes back and says, the I is not dotted. You never handed in your exam. That's essentially, would you say that's a reasonably fair analogy of basically if you have a real voter who's a legitimate voter, who signed their name and didn't put an I, or the signature really is not, very, very legible. And maybe it's somebody that doesn't have a signature that reproduces the same thing over again. And the assumption is it's not their signature as opposed to maybe it is, and we should check it out. And we don't because it doesn't compare well, means we just disqualify the vote as opposed to validating whether it's really that person. So right now it seems to be that's why, I consider that voter suppression. I mean, in almost every important relationship, when there in every contract, in almost every important relationship, usually when there's a breach, okay, that's not considered an intentional breach. Uh, there's usually clauses in almost every contract for a period for the breaching party to have an ability to cure a breach. That's very common, and that's common in every almost anybody's relationship they want in life. Is, gee, I made a mistake. Let me fix it. Not that I lose my job, that I lose my right to vote, not that I have a death penalty associated, with a small technical thing on my ballot that doesn't check out. And instead of checking it out, it should just be tossed. I mean, that's what we're talking about right now with respect to, what kind of mistake we want to make. What do you think about that, Manny?
Yeah, it's a great analogy, right? I mean, I totally believe you're absolutely right about cure periods and contracts. But here's a further analogy from me. Voting is like flying on a plane, right? You could get there 6 hours early. You could get there 30 minutes early. If you have a problem with your boarding pass, you could take care of it at the gate. You could take care of it when you check in, right? You could get bumped up to first class. But there's one thing you can't do on a flight is get there late. That plane's not going to wait for you. Once that plane takes off, too bad, so sad. So everything with regard to voting, right, has to happen before election day, right? If we're talking about late ballots, you can't cure a late ballot, right? Mail the ballot in early. I mean, again, look, I'm not a big fan of early voting, right? Again, it's like a plane, right? People can.
Let me sorry for interrupting. I submit my tax return. I mail it in on April 15th. Okay, it's not received on the 15th. It's all I have to do is my tax return is perceived as being filed, not when it's received, but when I can prove I sent it. Correct?
Right, but they're two different things.
If I forget to sign, if I forget to dot an I or make some technical flaw on my signature or don't date it, okay, should my tax return be deemed by the IRS as not received?
No, but they're two different things.
I don't view them as two different things. I have to file my tax. I have to vote. As long as the law only obligates me to submit my vote, doesn't have to be received. As you have a mail-in ballot, if you have a mail-in ballot, most states have determined that the obligation of the voter is to send it in by submit the vote. It doesn't have to be received.
Right, usually
submitted.
So
is that correct? So if I'm submitted on time, if the submission is on time, the submission is not late. The submission is on time.
Right.
So if I've submitted it on time and I've submitted something with a small technical flaw, you're saying that even though I submitted it on time, I shouldn't have the problem. I shouldn't be able to cure a problem.
No,
if I've submitted it on time. I have to submit it early to have it to be eligible for a cure period, not just on time.
It depends on it depends on that state, right? Now you got to understand the states are set up, except Colorado.
But I think Pennsylvania had those rulings that you could that had.
Right. It was a cluster. It was a complete cluster. It was a complete cluster. The boards of elections are very understaffed and they lack funding. They don't have the intellectual capital to do a lot of what you're talking about, and they're relying upon machinery.
Is that a reason to disenfranchise a voter because
No.
the state itself doesn't invest enough in being able to count votes properly and to cure those where there might be a minor flaw to the ballot, to the envelope, I should say, not the ballot itself, but the envelope.
So a couple things, right? So let's talk a little more specifically about this, right? Because I think we need to kind of answer this question, right? So some states have no excuse. Some states have excuse for an absentee ballot. So New York is moved to no excuse, right? Which means you could get a ballot, an absentee ballot, a mail-in ballot. My understanding is Pennsylvania during COVID just mailed ballots to people. The chain of custody starts if I contact the Board of Elections, assuming it's an excuse state that I am going to be out of town. There's a reason why I can't show up to vote. So that chain of custody starts with my request for that absentee ballot. Then the chain of custody continues when they mail the absentee ballot and then when they receive it, all of which should occur within a certain period of time. Usually the cutoff is before election day. If the cutoff's on election day, I agree with you. You should be given an opportunity to cure, but that has to happen within a reasonable period of time, meaning that if you meet your obligation, assuming the obligation is the ballot has to be postmarked by election day, you fill out the ballot, there's some kind of, there's some kind of mistake. You're contacted very shortly thereafter, let's see, it's even after election day, by the Board of Election. You should be given a very short period of time to cure. If you don't cure, then that ballot shouldn't count. It's like a contract, right? You have
everything you're saying now, I agree with everything.
You have a cure period, right? So a lot of states, you can vote early, you can vote via absentee ballot early, right? I'm talking specifically about if you screwed up and you made a mistake, but you mail the ballot in 3 days earlier, it can't be backdated. That's the problem. Is a lot of these ballots in every state, not just Pennsylvania, and this is pretty well known, the people at the boards of elections count these ballots that are received late. I mean, again, the plane took off. You lost your obligation to fly on that flight. You can wait for the next flight. You can wait for the next election, but show up. Fill out the ballot. Mail it in. How lazy are we as a country? I mean, if you really take this seriously, if it means something to you in terms of your civic right, do the right thing. Fill out the ballot correctly. Ask someone to proof it for you. Go to Board of Elections or mail it in early or just show up in person. I don't understand why people can't take 10 minutes to vote. I struggle with why people can't vote in person. I really struggle with it.
Independent of that issue of whether people should have to vote in person and whether mail-in ballots are legal, So, my question is this: how much of do you think of the I always say a measure of a decency of society is like, type 1, type 2 errors. And the example I like to give is, as a society, would we rather have which trade-off is more acceptable to us? To have an innocent person go to jail or a guilty person go free? And I like to see, I'd prefer a guilty person to go free before I'd want to see an innocent person in jail. So when we now take a look at all these ballots, and what you are acknowledging is basically an understaffed group of people, how many, and this is just, I'm asking you to speculate. So I know I'm just asking you to speculate. So you have an overwhelmed staff of people. They're getting all these ballots, some of them with flaw. We have an unprecedented election because it's under COVID. We're getting more mail-in ballots, and to anticipate, all the problems associated with the chain of custody through a process that's been so different than historically we have had. Do you think that the people who decided to count these ballots were people who were maliciously saying these are all Biden voters and I want to count them? Or do you think people who just said this is just a fucking mess, and I don't really want to be the person to disqualify all these people? I know I'm asking you to speculate, so, and maybe you have no opinion because it's impossible to have an opinion, but do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it depended on the jurisdiction, right? I think some of it was probably just people feeling bad that they didn't want to disenfranchise voters. And I think in other places, there was some irregularities where people were doing things intentionally, because there's no way that all of these ballots, with the lack of knowledge, the lack of training, both on the voter side and on the election worker side, should have been included. But you would think a lot of them would be cast aside, or there'd be litigation, or there would be a lot of ballots cured. And I'm not aware that actually occurred.
So instead of setting them aside and saying, let's figure out, so these ballots that should have been set aside, because they should have been set aside, doesn't mean that they were not that they ultimately were not a real voter submitting a real vote in a flawed way.
No, I mean, I've been involved in litigation in New York with regard to elections, right? And what happens is the court has a jurisdiction to actually call in each of the voters and say, did you complete this? Are you swearing, under perjury here, that this is actually your ballot, this is your signature, you completed this ballot. Call them in. This could be done. Not every voter, but on a sample basis or something that, there could be some type of verification. But I'm not aware that any of that was done. And that's where I feel it was a huge missed opportunity by the campaign. and an embarrassment.
What should the could the campaign have done anything at some point in time to force this to happen? Or, so how much of this was just, just poor legal work, or how much of it was just, they made the good arguments, they made them in a timely fashion, and they just got adverse rulings against them, even though they made good arguments. So
the campaign was not prepared. The campaign was not prepared at all, right? I think Trump is so arrogant and was so arrogant with that whole Hunter Biden laptop fiasco that he thought he was going to crush Biden. So he didn't care. He had, again, from my understanding, he really didn't have the street intelligence. So when you run an election, right, it's all local. Like I said, politics, the adage, politics is local and election law is state law. You need people in the street. You need people on the ground. I'm not aware that the campaign actually knew how the Pennsylvania poll workers, election workers, were going to handle the absentee ballots. I'm not sure Trump was the campaign was aware that either the envelopes are going to be maintained, shredded, whatever. I'm not even sure they knew until after the fact. When you get to that point, when you find something out after the fact, genie's out of the bottle. At that point, there was not much for them to do, which is kind of what we're talking about, right? You need to, obviously, there was training. Obviously, there was some direction from, I'm not sure whom, but there was some direction to these campaign workers how to treat these ballots, how to treat the mail-in ballots. Where was the campaign at that point? Trump was a president of the United States, had the Justice Department, under him, FBI, all the alphabet soup of government agencies. Where were they? Why didn't Trump, if he was so concerned about election integrity, and he claims the campaign, he didn't lose, was stolen, this kind of nonsense over and over again, why didn't he do his work up front to prevent what he claimed or alleged happened?
So let me get to some questions that I have. So one audience question is, do you agree that the 2020 election was stolen?
No. I think there were irregularities, and I think that the president and his team had an opportunity to address the irregularities in certain states like Pennsylvania, and he missed that opportunity, so he lost.
So is it fair to say it's not that rule of law failed, it's that he failed to exercise his rights in a responsible way at the right time? That he could have implemented.
Yeah, I think that's right. Look at P Diddy, right? So there's this video of P Diddy when unfortunately he assaulted, he hit Casey, his fiance at the time, at that hotel, and he was dragging her across the floor. Horrible video, right? That was released after the statute of limitations lapsed. So that happened in California, and the district attorney Gascon in LA said, this is horrible, but we can't do anything criminally because the statute of limitations has lapsed. So, under the law, stuff happens. If you don't bring an action within the proper action, withstanding and all that good stuff, and that's why you hire these lawyers who know how to practice the federal law, even before Trump appointed judge, you lose. That's it. Okay. Pretty straightforward stuff.
Now, another question. This is the second time I get this question about surge and mail-in ballots. Was there like this huge ballot drop of this one time that there was this very suspicious in one that you're familiar with? I'm not going to ask you to.
I mean, I've heard about it. I heard about it. I watched the movie on it, the documentary on it. About ballot harvesting. I've not seen. I'm not aware of ballot harvesting from my perspective. What I can tell you was, it did seem like there was a never-ending pile of ballots to be scanned. And I have no idea where they came from. But it just seemed like there were interruptions, as I mentioned earlier, but there were, stacks of ballots that were just put into the scanning machine and just scanned. And it was just a never-ending supply. Now, some people are claiming that. Some people are claiming that the reason that there were pauses in the scanning was that the Biden campaign was trying to figure out how far ahead or behind they were, and that they counted. That's why they didn't just keep scanning ballots in, that there were these pauses to determine, are we ahead or are we behind? If we're behind, then we keep scanning ballots. That's what I heard.
So but how would that be able to be proved? That so you hear this stuff, but there's probably a lot of stuff where there's a lot of theories, and it could be true and it cannot be true. But the point of it is that the Trump administration, did not take the proper legal action when it had an ability to take some level of legal action to get
No,
some sort of injunctions, something at prior, until waiting for it all to happen. And maybe he did because of what your speculation is, that he was so sure he was going to win that he didn't bother taking this other stuff seriously, because he thought he was going to win, and therefore was not prepared to really file aggressive lawsuits at the right point in time, where he might have been able to create a different outcome, and there might have been a different level of scrutiny that was hard to do after the fact.
right. I mean, look, the best marathon runner in the world doesn't show up, on the marathon date in November and run a New York Marathon without training. Everything takes work, a lot of hard work in advance. And that's why you have a campaign, and that's why you have an infrastructure, and you need a good team, and you need a strong team, especially in places where you're concerned about voting irregularities. In cities where you're worried about voting irregularities, you need to have the A team there, not the D team.
Let me try and do a summary so far of where we are in this conversation up to this point in time. A lot of irregularities. Okay, a lot of irregularities that didn't mean that Trump won. It just meant there were a lot of irregularities that, with a competent legal strategy, there could have been better validation. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when I hear this thing about someone taking a statistically impossible surge to me in ballot deliveries is more ballots than voters. So, I mean, the voter participation rate, has been higher than other elections, but still, our voter turnout is not great. So, when people talk about statistical impossibility, I mean, what we've seen in some of the statistics is that we had younger voters, or many other voters who people have been identified as Democrats. In many areas, they came out to vote more than they have in the past, but still, voter turnout was not 70%, I don't think. So, I mean, and I don't know how many local jurisdictions had more votes than voters. So that, to me, then, is statistically impossible. But I don't know what other thing is statistically impossible. I don't know how many ballot drops are statistically impossible, and I don't know how much evidence people really have of, a ballot dump that had zero chain of custody, where apparently there was no investigation, because from what I've read, that a lot of these claims were investigated, and these claims were disproven. So, and I think there've been some documents prepared by some lawyers on exactly all. I think this never Trumper, but a Republican, Benjamin, when I forget his name, he was in the Bush administration. So he and a couple of other lawyers put together a piece where they basically said, here are a bunch of the claims you've read in many of the pro-Trump publications, and here's the actual evidence disproving those claims. But I think many of the people who believe these claims are not the sources that they find these claims are not generally providing the evidence that many of these claims have been disproven. So they don't really, care about having access to, information that's inconsistent with whatever opinion that they have.
I mean, think about this. Think about this, right? If Trump had the Justice Department right after Election Day conduct an investigation, a lot of these questions would have been answered, right? Or at least an attempt to get these questions answered, and then it would have been proven whether he won or lost, and he lost. Then he couldn't claim that he won and he was cheated. So I feel it was intentional. Again, it's my opinion, for the campaign as a strategy, because he's a sore loser, to say there was ballot harvesting, all these election irregularities, which I'm not disputing, but I'm not saying, did they tip the ballots and make a difference in the election? We don't know. At that point, he lost the election. He had the power of the government, which has unlimited resources, to do this investigation. We're relying upon private people, private lawyers, Michael Lindell, to do the forensics. I mean, how ridiculous is this? Guy's a president of the United States. If he really wanted to get it to the bottom of it, he could have. Why didn't he do it? Why didn't he do it when, he had the power?
Your speculation is he didn't do it when he could have done it, when it could have been meaningful that he did it, because he might have thought the outcome still might have been the same, that he would have lost.
Of course.
Therefore, he didn't want to possibly prove that he really did lose. So it's better to wait after and then whine like he's constantly.
Of course. I mean, think about it. You win you're the president. You feel like the election was stolen. You wouldn't use the powers that you have to make a determination to validate your claims that the election was stolen and you won? Well, absolutely. You have the ability to do that. And he didn't do it. It didn't come up. Why didn't it come up? You're relying upon Rudy and a motley crew of attorneys, cast of characters, which, come out of a comedy movie, Mike Lindell and the like, to kind of argue these claims on behalf of the president of the United States. Are you kidding me? I mean, it's a joke. It's sad that, we're still talking about this stuff. It's interesting that we're talking about it, but it's sad that we're still talking about it as if Trump lost the election and people believe that. And JD Vance, how many times would he refuse to say Trump lost the election? Over 20 times or something. He was asked that question.
Well, the interesting thing to me, and I sent you the link to this article, in preparation for our call today, our conversation today, but is in his denial, the only reference he made is a claim that can't be proven or disproven, which is a lot of illegal voters. So I know right now there's in many states, governors, are now having aggressive checks of eligible voters, and they are removing people from ballots, from the registered voter list, I should say, and they have found some illegals, but I saw in one state they disallowed, they removed 1 million voters from the list, and 6,500 of them were illegals. So that it was a small component.
Yeah, JD Vance,
and we don't know how many people have been removed who are real voters. We don't know that. There might be more than 6,500 who were removed who might actually be actual voters, right, but because their dress was undeliverable or some other technical thing, they might really exist. Maybe they're at another address. Maybe they use a PO box. Maybe they had a little technical flaw or something. Maybe they haven't been able to fight all the things where they moved, and they might have moved in state, and they're no longer living at that address, and they didn't file a change of address, and so it's quite possible that I know in some of the places, in some of the jurisdictions where they filed challenges to the voter rolls, that a majority of them have proven to be actual voters. So they would have ended up disenfranchising a lot of voters. So far in those states, of 1 million, we found 6,500, that were illegal registered. That didn't mean all 6,500 would actually vote. We found 6,500 that were registered. So, and again, we might have removed more legal voters who actually registered than found illegal voters. But in the claim, the only thing they're mentioning now, which seems to be a common theme, is that if they're lost, it's because of all illegals voting, which they have really no evidence of. It's something that can't be proven or disproven, so it's the perfect claim to make because it can't be proven or disproven. Go ahead, Manny.
Right. I mean, look, they apparently have some kind of fetish and obsession with illegals, right? With migrants, eating dogs and cats now, voting. It's kind of ridiculous, right? I'll put it to this way. I know this sounds kind of extreme and absurd, but if Trump really thought he won the election, why did he leave the White House? Why did he voluntarily move out? If he truly felt he won the election, why didn't he do what he needed to do to prove that he won? I mean, he clearly lost because he moved out. Why would he have left the White House voluntarily? winner, if he won the election, you would agree to just move out? Like,
No,
seriously, I know this sounds like a kind of crazy kind of constitutional crisis issue, and it is, but why did he agree for the smooth transition of power? I mean, I know he didn't go to the inauguration, but like
that to me, at the point in time when of the election, I was actively engaged an investor and actively engaged as an investor and an advisor to Paula. I wrote an article when initially they called Biden president-elect. I challenged calling Biden president-elect because it was interesting. I did a check on Wikipedia on the definition of president-elect. I wrote an article, and I had my colleague screenshot the Wikipedia article. So I wrote my article basically saying that that Biden is not president-elect. He could be the projected winner, but he's not president-elect. Because in Wikipedia they define president-elect as once there's been either an act of concession or all the legal challenges have been exhausted. So Trump never conceded, and there were still legal challenges he was in the process of making, and there was no certification. So as long as Trump was continuing to challenge the election, then Biden is not president-elect. So that was my assertion. I put an article out. It's interesting. After my article went out, I think it was published on maybe Dan Bongino's website. I think he agreed to publish the piece, and so after that. 2 more times after that, Wikipedia changed the criteria of calling president-elect.
Oh, wow.
I pushed this issue, and after I pushed this issue, and I'm not saying there's cause and effect, it could just be coincidental, but Facebook actually changed the designation because I was pushing this hard. I was speaking to the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I said, look, there are 6 states out there that are now swing states. You have a prediction markets. The prediction markets have Biden at like an 80%, 75% chance of winning. So I said, I'm a finance guy. A bond that trades at a 30% haircut to par is called a junk bond. So right now, Biden is likely going to win those states, but there's no guarantee he's going to win those states. And I would tell you, if I called you up one day and said, you gave me $100, and that $100 is now worth $75, I believe you think that was a very material change, and you'd be very angry, and you'd consider that a material event. So let's just say this haircut is material. So it means that there's some validity to Trump's claims. It's not a likely validity, but it's enough that it's got a 25% chance. So that's something meaningful. And right now, Biden is essentially a junk bond. So he's the projected winner, but he's not the president-elect yet. You got to let this litigation play itself out before final determination can be made, given the fact that there's been no active concession. So I would argue with the New York Times, the Washington Post, all these people about them trying to brainwash the people that Biden was president-elect and that they should give us civics lessons instead, in saying this is still a challenged election, that yes, Biden is fair to call him the projected winner, and ultimately, after like less than 2 weeks, I think, Facebook actually changed Biden from being president-elect to projected winner. And I'm not claiming credit for that because I have no evidence that it's just coincidental. And maybe there is some cause and effect. I have no idea. So I don't think I'm that important that maybe I changed it, but I still enjoy them changing that. So given the fact that now Biden is the projected winner and not president-elect, why did Trump accept the beginning of the transition process for somebody who was not the president-elect?
Correct.
To me, that was the day Trump conceded. Not the day he left the White House, but to me, he conceded the day, because it's inconsistent to say, I'm giving all this confidential information to just a citizen, right? Because that's all, until Biden is the president-elect, he's just a citizen, right?
Correct.
So why is a citizen able to get all the confidential information and begin a transition process into the White House? Can I just call up and say, why don't you give me all this information and begin a transition process? Because you don't really have to be the president-elect to get it. You could just be somebody who claims to be the president, and you get the process. So to me, in my opinion, and I think it's a valid, it's certainly a consistent opinion that the day Trump allowed the transition, he conceded the election.
I agree. And why are we just going to hold a concession to something, orally, verbally that someone says? I mean, his actions, are consistent with someone who is, conceding and handing over the keys.
Yeah. So now we get to the point. In November, in post-November, you're in there. You're a lawyer for Trump. You're still pro-Trump. Now you're not. What happened to the evolution of Manny to go from being someone who was enthusiastic for Trump in 2016, hoping and thinking that he would drain the swamp, to 2020 believing I'm less enthusiastic, but he's still the better of the choices, to now I don't like him anymore. So walk me through that evolution from how you went from a supporter to someone who no longer supports him.
Well, the first thing is January 6th. The first thing is January 6th, right? I mean, I think January 6th is just a horrible day in the history of this country. And I don't think any of January 6th is okay, acceptable, permissible, whatever. I think everything and anything, anybody who's involved with January 6th is problematic, committed crimes, and anybody who is behind it is not a patriot. So at that point, I started to distance myself with the campaign in, doing further research on January 6th. I mean, it's clear, right, that, and this is public knowledge, that January 6th was planned. Now, I'm not sure to what extent the campaign was involved with it or people around the campaign, but you don't put an event on like that without planning, right? I mean, they had bunting, they had a stage, they had all these speakers, right? Now, and the Proud Boys. I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on there that clearly was planned to, I'm not sure, accomplish what? Force Pence to not certify, to get zip tied Nancy Pelosi to a chair in her office. I mean, the ridiculousness of this whole thing, absent the fact of, the illegality and criminality of people who are claiming that they're patriots, to destroy the Capitol, which to me is a sacred place. I mean, I'm the children of immigrants. My dad's from Italy. My grandparents on my mom's side are from Italy, and I'm a lawyer and I'm a patriot, and I'm someone who's very patriotic. My grandfather was a citizen, dad's a citizen. Everybody in the family who was not born in America who became a citizen is extremely patriotic. And I believe in liberty, and that's not a demonstration of liberty to grab a shield from a police officer and smash a window in the Capitol and enter the Capitol and wreak havoc on the Capitol. That is a black eye as far as I'm concerned, the history of this country. So Trump stands behind that. Trump calls the people who were involved in January 6th heroes. He thinks they should be released from any kind of sentencing or prison terms that they were granted. I mean, look, at the end of the day, right? He's done nothing to raise money for these people. So the utmost hypocrite is Trump, right? He is the epitome of hypocrisy. He claims these people should be defended, yet he does nothing to raise money for their legal defense. A lot of people went there believing in this narrative of Trump that stop the steal. Right, that's what the motto was behind January 6th: stop the steal. And the January 6th hearings became political, with Liz Cheney and Adam Schiff, right? And it was all all the name calling by Trump and all the Trump accolades. Right, at the end of the day, January 6th is one of the most horrible days in the history of this country, and people don't realize that. They need to do their research. Google it. Watch YouTube the videos. They're there. It is a horrendous day in the history of this country, right? It clearly was an act of insurrection by the president and by people around the president. Anybody who disagrees with me, fine. You could have your opinion, but I know I'm right, right? We could agree to disagree. It's a horrible day in the history of this country. So that was the beginning of my separation from Trump. And then, in hindsight, looking back at his 4 years, I realized there were failed 4 years. Looking back to COVID, I mean, people blame Fauci. I mean, Who could have fired Fauci? Me? You? Trump? Trump thought Fauci was great. Remember the press conference? We talked about bleach, putting bleach in your veins, and this whole kind of idiocy. Like, he was there with Trump on stage many times, right? In the White House having a press conference. Trump could have fired him.
More than that, Trump said he put together the greatest team in the history of humanity, given the crisis that they were facing. And so the names that people who people malign right now, and maybe justifiably so, are the people that Trump called the dream team of pandemics. You know, as Trump also ridiculed, I don't know, it was Sweden, the country that decided not to lock down. He ridiculed the country that decided to not lock down, and he even ridiculed DeSantis when DeSantis opened up early. When DeSantis realized that he made a mistake because DeSantis was consulting with other professionals, who wrote I guess the Barrington whatever declaration, where they were against the policies of lockdowns and wearing masks and all the other stuff. I called it a pandemic of fear. I don't think it was a real other pandemic than a fear. But he had ridiculed. He keeps saying that he didn't do the lockdowns, but the people who opened up early, he ridiculed, and the country that didn't lock down at all, he ridiculed. So he began the lockdown, and he subsidized the lockdown with all the money that he gave, and all the bailout money he gave, and the Paycheck Protection Program, and all the other money that was wasted. That almost every academic study done has demonstrated that almost all that money was completely wasted. So yeah, I think for me, I went through. I was sympathetic for Trump the first 3 years. When people asked me what I thought of Trump for the first 3 years, I said, I'd give him like a B as a president, B minus. So I didn't think he was awful. I didn't think he was great. But I didn't think he was awful. But I thought I thought, every time we define ourselves by how we handle a crisis, and I think Trump has handled this crisis, and I think it was probably the worst managed crisis. That's just the thing that is unfathomable to me, is how his supporters justify, the handling of COVID and blame everybody but him. We once had a president who said the buck stops with me. Now we had somebody who said everything great was all about me, and everything bad, there's somebody else to blame. Don't look at me. So how people admire somebody with those type of attributes, that's hard for me to understand. Forget about ideology, just as a human being, somebody who takes credit for everything that's good and everything bad, it's everybody else is a loser except for you. So, I don't know, if I hire a bunch of losers, I would think of myself as a loser if I hired a bunch of losers. So, he was responsible for Fauci, and why people don't hold him responsible. I don't know if Fauci was Rasputin that held some spell over him or whatever. I don't know. So yes, I think, and what I try and remind people about January 6th is that it was partially successful. For 4 hours, certification was delayed. So I don't think, how many members of Congress were supposedly, I guess if it was just amusing, how many members of Congress just stayed in the chamber, hanging out, conversing with the people who came in? Did anyone know whether the people coming in at that point in time were armed or not armed? Did anyone have that knowledge? Can anyone have said with certainty that nobody had entered? It's been proven after that the time nobody was armed, but did anybody really know that was the case at the day of people sitting in the chamber? So I always found amused that I saw this one, I forget which senator, Hawley. They show a clip of him fist bumping the people going in, and then when they invade, he's sprinting for safety. So I found seeing those two clips juxtaposed as very humorous. So the crowd that he's fist bumping to, yeah, man, we're gonna do it today. And then when they enter, he's sprinting for his life. I mean, he was sprinting. He just showed running down the hall. He just showed quick, whoop, like that. It was I found it sad and amusing. So given the juxtaposition of his previous interaction with the same group of people, that one
and also,
that he's scared shit of them.
I also blame Trump for the economy that we're facing right now, right? I mean, you're a very, very successful entrepreneur and someone who knows the economy very well, right? I mean, with all the spending you mentioned, it caused overheating in the economy. That doesn't happen right away in terms of inflation, right? I mean, anybody who takes economics 101 realizes that when you have crazy excessive government spending, you cause inflation. And did Biden do anything to curtail that, stem it, stop it? No, but 100% of this that's going on in the economy is not Biden's fault. I mean, if you think it's just Biden's fault, then you need to learn, to even read a Wikipedia article about economics 101 and about overheating and government spending. Right? I think you mentioned, you hit the nail on the head.
I think talking about economics, given the fact that I have a training in economics from the University of Chicago, and I've been deemed to have enough knowledge to have been invited back to give talks at the University of Chicago. So, and the University of Chicago this year, one of the three winners of the Nobel Prize in Economics, again, which was announced this morning. James Robinson teaches as on the faculty at the University of Chicago. I think University of Chicago has had more than 20 Nobel Prize winners in economics, and the University of Chicago has more Nobel Prize winners than any other university in the country. In total, it has over 100 Nobel Prize winners that have been affiliated with the university. So I think that's a pretty good pedigree, to have. But Milton Friedman said, basically, government spending, big government spending, and money printing, that validated by government spending is what causes inflation. He once said inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomena. So let's take a look at the facts. Let's not take a look at I've made my money as an investor, so I can't be a partisan. Okay, I have to just be good. At Fisher Black. I think one of the smartest people I ever met in my life. He, as his presidential address for the American Finance Association, gave a talk called Noise, and to simplify the conclusion, he said basically in economics, the epsilon, the error term, is considered just pure white noise. In finance, everything interesting is embedded in that noise term, and that basically it's like picking the needle through the haystack. You got to find the information that's embedded in noise, and that's how you make money. So you make everything that's of value is in that noise term, and it's hard to find that's what's valuable embedded in that noise, and that's why few people outperform the markets on a consistent basis. So it's all about what some people call signal extraction, is being able to inside the noise filter out all the noise and find the real information that's hidden and embedded in that noise. So that's the job of an investor who approaches investing the way I do. So you can't be partisan. If you're partisan about the way you look at information, you'll just lose a lot of money. So let's take a look at what happened in around 2020 when you mentioned inflation. The Fed ran an experiment between 2020 and the beginning of the COVID through the middle of 2021, that over about an 18-month period, I think, and then people should check my numbers, but I think the money supply increased in about an 18-month period of time, 40%. So we've never had that kind of increase in the money supply in such a short period of time. Now, part of that increase, it's true, did come during the Biden administration, but during the point in time that this increase was happening, we have to recognize couple of things. The Fed is independent, okay? Also, the majority of the members of the Fed on the Board of Governors were Trump appointees. So this is a Trump-appointed Fed running independent, no evidence that they were controlled, that Biden called them up and he told these Fed members just start printing a lot of money, because they already begun the money printing in 2020 and they continue doing it in 2021. Should Biden be responsible for the fact that the Fed irresponsibly printed a huge amount of money in a short period of time? Or is money printing completely unrelated to inflation? And do we have that level of ignorance in it with respect to economics? We probably have that level of ignorance with respect to economics, because people are partisan. Oh, it's Biden inflation. So, so somehow, how did Biden cause the inflation? Well, it's Biden inflation, and so therefore it's inflation. I think that's stupid. Also, in 2021, I've seen two numbers of what Trump wanted to give away to people for giving more money. Trump wanted to go big in stimulus in 2021, and I've seen numbers that he wanted to give 2,000 to 2,500 away to individuals. What the Democrats agreed to in 2021 was 1,400. So ultimately, the fiscal stimulus package the Biden administration implemented in 2021 was smaller than the fiscal stimulus package that Trump wanted to implement in 2021. So Trump wanted to increase a bigger stimulus package, and the Fed that he appointed printed a lot of money. Now, who are the people that curtailed the money printing? Were the people that Biden nominated to replace the Trump people. So what did Biden got dealt with? The fact is that the money supply increased in 40% over this about 18-month period of time, and now the money supply had to be contracted to reflect an overstimulus of both fiscal stimulus that Biden was responsible for and monetary stimulus. But the fiscal stimulus Trump would have done basically the same thing as Biden did. Somehow Trumpers believe Trump's fiscal stimulus would have been more effective than Biden's fiscal stimulus, and the Trump deficit is better than a Biden deficit. So, that maybe one promotes greater economic activity than the other, but that's hard to prove because the economic growth during the Trump administration was not materially better. In fact, the first 3 years of the Trump administration pre-COVID, the economy did not grow at a materially different path than the last 3 years of the Obama administration. So pre-COVID, Trump did not necessarily outperform Obama. And actually, when we take a look at a lot of the drilling that occurred during the Trump administration, people think that when you issue permits, that they go in and you turn on the spigot and oil comes out. They don't know that the permits are to do exploration and development. So before you go into production. So that period of time can take 4 to 7 years. So who gave out? Actually, Obama gave more drilling permits out than Trump did. So, but people just turn everything into a partisan argument rather than actually looking at data and looking at facts and trying to understand what those things mean. My job as an investor is to understand what things mean. I don't care who the author is. I don't care if it's Obama, Trump, Biden, whoever it is. The author of something is irrelevant to me. It's the content of what they're producing, not the author who produces it. So so to me, the author is completely irrelevant. I have to take a look at the policy and what I think are the consequences of that policy. And then I'm probably neutral. Sometimes I had a friend that criticized me the other day who said that I sound like I'm anti-Trump. I want to get something clear. I was a fan of Ronald Reagan while I'm an anarcho-capitalist and I don't vote and I don't care about politics. I know that whoever gets elected will be good for my Bitcoin. So I know my Bitcoin will go up independent of who wins this year. And who's inaugurated next year. So I'm confident that my Bitcoin will continue to go up, and that's how I immunize myself from the stupidity of politics. But I'm critical of Republicans and not Democrats for a simple reason. For me, Democrats are a lost party, okay? So Democrats don't believe in the concept of economic freedom whatsoever. And so I have zero hope for freedom under Democratic regime, zero. So my only hope is a Republican point of view that's consistent with Reaganism, a Republican point of view that's consistent with a limited government, from a Republican who will run for office, reminding us that the most dangerous words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So I'm hoping. I criticize the Republicans because my hope is that republicanism will return to a party that actually believes in Republican ideology of limited government, free trade, not not this nativist, nationalist, populist policies, which I think are antithetical to both our founding values and what Republicans have stood for. And post-war, the best performing president post World War II was Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan on an agenda of American strength but not aggression, a president who wanted to eliminate nuclear weapons, a president who actually proposed budget cuts, but he had a Democratic Congress, and he couldn't cut government. At least he slowed the rate of growth of government, and a rate of growth that actually Clinton respected. And Clinton ended up being as fiscally responsible from a spending perspective as Reagan was, and who kept preaching while having to negotiate with the Democrats who believe in big government. Reagan's message was consistent and constant about his belief in free markets and economic freedom and individual liberty. So Reagan never sold himself as someone who was our savior. Reagan sold himself as somebody who was a good communicator of values that he believed were our foundational values, and he was consistent with expressing those values. He gave a very articulate defense of those values in the talk he gave that was on radio, I think GE, when he endorsed Barry Goldwater. So I want people to, I do have a bias, like every human being, as far as politically, is that my hope for the future for my grandchildren is a Republican who will return to Republican virtues, as exhibited by Ronald Reagan, in my opinion, the greatest post-World War II president. Manny, your opinion?
Yeah, look, I think that Trump, I hear you. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Look, I think that Trump, just like generally, I think that Trump lost me, right? I'm not sure if Trump knows who he is. I've been watching this. I'm a big fan of wrestling. Not really today, but I like old WWE wrestling, Hulk Hogan era and that kind of thing. And there's a really interesting documentary on Vince McMahon. And I didn't realize how crazy Vince McMahon was and how peculiar he was. And they filmed this documentary before Vince McMahon actually had these sexual harassment allegations filed against him. And then Vince McMahon, WWE was acquired by Endeavor, and Vince McMahon was on the board of Endeavor with The Rock. And then Vince McMahon, after it was at the New York Stock Exchange and whole thing, had a press conference. And then after these charges came, Vince McMahon resigned from the board, and obviously was distanced himself. But what's interesting about this documentary series is Trump is in it. And there's this match called the hair match. I highly advise your followers and the viewers to watch it. It's real fun and interesting. So Trump had this match against Vince McMahon, and it was billionaire versus billionaire. And the deal was they weren't going to wrestle, but they were behind these two wrestlers. And then whoever won, the winner was able to shave the head with these buzzers and these clippers of the loser. And of course, Trump won. And everybody sees this famous meme of Trump, sticking out his elbow, right, and just hitting McMahon and smashing him on the ground, right. And that's a famous meme that people see, right. That's in this documentary. And then you see, Vince McMahon is in the ring, and as if he's got a barber's apron around him, and Trump is like with this look on his face, the same look that Trump has, when he's on the stage, is actually the same Trump, buzzing the head of Vince McMahon. Then they cut back to like the press conference for this event and this match, and it's the same Trump. And if you think like wrestling is scripted, wrestling is fake, right? It's theater, right? It's called entertainment. And although the people who wrestle are extremely athletic, but it's entertainment. It's all predetermined. But Trump is heavily into it, promoting these things back in Atlantic City when he had his casinos, a Taj Mahal and stuff like that. But literally was in this match, and the move is called a clothesline, where you stick your arm out and you slam it against the neck of your opponent. And he clotheslined Vince McMahon. He shaves Vince McMahon's head. And, the documentary calls into question, like, the character of Vince McMahon. He plays this character, Mr. McMahon, in the WWE. Then this character of Trump. And then they kind of go into the fact that Trump's the president and how different or similar is Trump as president from Trump, who was in that match, and the presidency with wrestling. And it's really kind of crazy. And if you think about Ronald Reagan and you think about our founding fathers and you read the Federalist Papers and, you really get enamored with this country and the foundations of this country that was established. And you think of this foolish, foolish guy Trump is, who's just, all he cares about is promoting Trump. And there's, he's selling baseball cards, or he's selling, like memorabilia with him saying, fight, where he's got the blood on his ear, like this badge of courage. It's like, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson are turning over in their graves. I mean, this is levels of embarrassment that we've never seen. MAGA is not Republican. MAGA is not conservative. Barry Goldwater, right? William F. Buckley, the gods of modern conservatism. Milton Friedman, the amount of spending. Ronald Reagan, the amount of spending in the Trump administration. Trump is not a conservative. Trump doesn't believe in individual liberties. Trump doesn't believe in the Constitution, right? Trump is not a constitutionalist. Trump is a Trumpist. And that is what Trump decides with some people maybe who are on The Apprentice, Omaroso, whoever is in vogue at that time for Trump to meet with, he will meet with. He goes to UFC events. I'm a big fan of UFC. But again, wrestling and fighting and this aggression, and I like sports, I like that stuff, but there's a wall between me as a lawyer, me as a constitutionalist, me as someone who's interested in politics, and that fun stuff, right? It's fun entertainment, it's sports recreational, and then there's like serious business here. Trump has blurred the lines between the two for his own benefit. He just wants to be popular. He's talking about his popularity. I remember during the debate with Kamala Harris, when she got under his skin by saying that a lot of people don't show up at his events, right? At his town halls. And it's like he gets highly offended if you talk about the number of people that show up at my event and that kind of thing. And I was going to be at MSG. I mean, how dumb is it for this campaign in the crucial last days of the election, Jeff, to be in Madison Square Garden, like the 27th of October, right? He should be in the battleground stage. He should be out there trying to win votes in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, firming up Ohio, right? That's where he needs to be, even Nevada. He's going to be at MSG rallying the troops from where? Some people on Long Island, the Trump supporters out on Eastern Long Island, or maybe from, parts of Staten Island, or people from upstate coming down to MSG. I mean, again, it's all about his ego. I mean, if people don't realize that is a waste of time, right? If you really want to win the election, you don't debate Kamala Harris a second time, but you go to MSG to have an event. I mean, it's so straight up. If anybody knows anything, just YouTube and Google past presidential elections, how people campaign, how people win elections. Look at George W. Bush. We'll call Rove, like Bush or not, or hate. Rove was a master tactician. It's about winning the electoral college. I mean, obviously you could lose the popular vote. You have to be in those states that you can win, that you could flip. You're going to be in New York a week before the election at MSG, rallying the troops. Let's have a wrestling event. Let's have a UFC event there at the same time. I mean, Trump's an embarrassment, and I'm saddened that I didn't see this years ago. I got caught up in the whole thing. I liked Trump when he was younger. I actually met Trump years ago. I went to a book signing for The Art of the Deal. I still have The Art of the Deal. I waited in line. I took pictures with him. I made him write to Manny, your idol, Donald Trump. And at that time, I thought he was cool, Woolman Rink, whatever. I'm watching the Republican convention, right? And I'm seeing videos of Ed Koch at the Republican convention. Now, Trump's talking about he was president. Very little discussion was made of his first term. There were alliterations to, Trump, Woolman Rink. I was like 40 years ago. Who cares about that right now? But it's all about him and all about the glory days of Trump. Ivanka Trump and the whole. I mean, that's over. That's over. What did he do as president? Here's my big fear. He wins. let's say he wins, right? Do you think he's going to get anybody to work for him that is unbiased? Now, I know every president kind of has people that agree with him or her, right? But, in terms of ideology, but not 100%. But he's going to get all these Trump sycophants. No one in government right now is going to work in government. We're going to have work stoppages because people are going to quit. People will quit their jobs to not work for government. Usually people want to work for the president. You look at Stephanopoulos, he became a journalist. He's a very, very important journalist. Took over for David Brinkley. He's on Good Morning America this week, the whole thing, right? He was chief of staff for Bill Clinton, right? All these people work for presidents, become really successful. Name all the people who work for Trump. What happened to them? Anthony Scaramucci. I mean, all these people, these people are like tarred and feathered for working for Trump for the rest of their careers. People who gave up millions of dollars and their reputations to work for Trump. And what does Trump do? He stabs them in the back. I mean, all the president's men, it's the most disloyal guy in the history of Washington, D.C. So why would anybody support Trump? Trump doesn't even, here's what it boils down to. I don't think Trump thinks he could win this election. From what I'm hearing, Trump already knows he lost. That's why you're hearing these rumors already about election irregularities, and nobody's going to believe the mail-in voting argument this time. So now they're going to the illegals voting. And he has J.D. Vance as his mouthpiece out there, talking about eating cats and dogs, talking about all the stuff like that. Like, if you, again, his actions don't, mirror and match his words. He lost the election, yet he acts like a concession. He conceded, he leaves the White House. Doesn't put up a fight, doesn't challenge it legally, effectively, has all these private lawsuits, right? Well, motivated by private interests, right? Really not the campaign or not from the Justice Department doing an investigation, which he had the authority to do. Where's the excitement about his campaign? He's not on any morning shows. He does no press outside of his rallies. I mean, I feel like he's already admitting that he lost, and he's looking for an excuse to say why he lost. He already said the other day, it's not fair, I beat Biden. Now, let's talk about that for a second, which I think is interesting. Biden wants to debate Trump in June. At that point, neither of them were the nominee of the party, right? But Trump is so arrogant, he wanted to beat up on old man Joe, right? He couldn't resist. And what did he do? He created this situation where Biden did the old switcheroo, got out of the race and put Kamala Harris in without having a primary or anything like that, right? So Trump bit the bait, and everybody knows it. And he's pissed off about it, and he's upset about it. He says not fair, but he's going to lose to Kamala Harris, someone who couldn't get 1% in the Democratic primary. I mean, talking about ego. I mean, maybe Trump's going to be on suicide watch after the election day. People should watch out for him because I don't know how he's going to handle losing this time. Honestly,
I don't know either. I'm not so sure he's going to lose. Right now, the prediction markets have him up at the Poly market has him at 55 and Kamala at 45, and predicted now, I'm checking, has Trump at 54 cents and Kamala at 50 cents. So I rely upon the prediction markets more than any polling.
mm-hmm.
People have skin in the game. Polling, people barely have their reputation because they're right one year and then they're wrong a bunch of years after that, but they can profit off the year they're right, and that compensates for all the years that they're wrong. So, I tend to think that Trump will win, but I think he's hedging his bet because he knows it'll be close. So I don't think he thinks he's going to lose, but I think he knows it's going to be very close and that there's a good chance he could lose. But I think, from what I'm observing, and I could be wrong. One is Trump has no quit in him. So even if he's not necessarily allocating every moment the most effective way, and is doing it in a way where part of the reason why I think he's not doing some of these other interviews is because I think especially after some of the release of some of this information from Smith, I think there are a bunch of questions he doesn't want to have to answer. And the rallies are a great ego feed for him, and it energizes him and seems to give him a lot of energy. And for a guy his age, he does have an incredible amount of energy. So I think he'll outwork Kamala. So even if he's older, he'll still outwork her. And uh, he's supremely, while he's very insecure, he's also supremely confident in a certain way, and sort of shameless. Kamala, to me, is vacuous, and doesn't seem to be, and seems to be risk averse. So he's willing to take risk, and from what I see from her, she's not willing to take much of a risk. So I think she's going to have to take. And I'm not an expert at predicting these things, so so my opinion could be just real pure garbage, but it's my opinion. Is that I think she needs to take a greater risk, and I don't think she's got the composition to do it. Um, just like she can't define herself well. So as she's described as doing these word salads of saying a lot of things that mean nothing. Trump's willing to say a lot of things that, he's going to mass deport people and build a wall and have and solve every world problem overnight and things like that. But he's bold. He's willing to say things, even if some of these things are really insane. He's willing to stay and he's willing to have an opinion. He's willing to take a stand on it. So I can understand how many people, when they're looking for a leader, the question is, do you want a leader who at least will stand up for things they say, or somebody who says nothing and you don't really know what they stand for? So I don't think anyone knows what Kamala stands for, and I think that's her problem in being able to close the deal. And even I just saw the opening of Saturday Night Live, where they had the skit of Family Feud, Kamala's family and the Trump family, and Saturday Night Live is also ridiculing Kamala. So that's how bad her campaign is. That even Saturday Night Live is ridiculing her. So I'm not sure. The one thing is that I disagree with is I don't believe Trump believes he's going to lose. I just think he believes that there's a good chance he will lose, but that he likely will win. But if he does lose, it can't. He has to make sure that nobody believes it's a legitimate outcome. So that's how he hedges. So that's just my belief, is that he's if he does lose, that people will all that the people who support him, and he'll also maybe get convince some other independents, because he repeats it over and over again, that he will be convincing some other independents that the results should be questioned, and that maybe there was another stolen election for him. So that's what I believe. I think he's just setting himself up for the possibility, but I still think he thinks he's going to likely win, and at this point, I think he's likely going to win, unless, as I said, Kamala takes a greater risk, and decides she wants to stand for something and demonstrate that she has leadership skills, which to me she hasn't. Not that I think Trump has good leadership skills, because part of having a good leadership skill is being able to recruit the best. And normally, to recruit the best, you got to show that you're loyal to people and that you can treat them with respect. And you don't have people, signing a loyalty oaths and things like that. There was a little during when Reagan was president. I think it was during the Reagan administration, when there were leaks, and at one point I think they were looking to take lie detector tests, and I'm not quite exactly sure, but my memory might be flawed. But they asked George Shultz to take one, and he said, no. You trust me. If you trust me, trust me. If you don't trust me, fire me. So if you think you need a polygraph test to determine whether you trust me or not, just fire me. So I think, and I don't believe he was then subjected to a lie detector test. I think if you want to be a good leader, you got a good leader puts the people the team he leads in a position where they can be successful. So, and that's my opinion, at least, of a good leader. Maybe people might dispute that. So, but that's my position. So I don't think either one of them are good leaders. But I think many people, how they define leadership, might view Trump as somebody who's a better leader than Kamala, and might not like either one of them, and think that Trump's the better choice of the two, and that's logic. I could understand. I can understand a lot of people thinking Trump is a much better choice than Kamala. That I can understand. How anyone could be enthusiastic about somebody with his type of character, that forget about whether that I can understand that that's troubling, because if that's how we want to treat each other, if I don't know how civil a society we can have if that's how we interact with people we disagree with. If basically we demonize people and insult them, we think that this is a way. I guess many parents should raise their kids the same way, since it's good leadership, right? If your kids get a bad grade, just come in and call them a loser. If the kid says something bad about the parent, you got to tell them that what a loser that they are. And I guess many people think that would be a good way of interacting with people who are their loved ones and their employees and their bosses and whomever in their relationships that are close in their life, that they want to imitate, Trump's behavior. I would hope that most people would not want to, and I would hope it would be unacceptable, independent of whatever the ideology was, that we just should set boundaries on what we think is civil behavior, and we should expect civil behavior from people who represent us. And I think it's sad that we no longer have that expectation, that our candidate, the people, not only we be aligned ideology, but they actually represent values that we share, unless these are the values we have, that we basically, I think Trump just said the other day, it was just, that basically the enemy from within seems to be everyone that doesn't vote for him. And that they're the ones destroying the country,
Nice.
and that we got to use the military against them. So I don't. Maybe he would have defined more of how he wants to use the military, but apparently he wants to replace the police force with the military, and he wants to go after people who he deems enemies of the state. And his criteria of who an enemy of the state is seems to be very, very broad. So it's sad to me that Americans can support that. Even if you agree with that we need to have a wall, and even if you agree that we got to stop illegal immigration, and even if you believe that Kamala is a bad leader, the question is what boundaries do we have on behavior that we find is acceptable in society, and that we want somebody who really represents not themselves but represents us. I wouldn't want anyone representing me behaving like Trump behaves. Even if I thought they were the smartest person in the world, and technically great at what they do, I just don't think I stand for that, and I wouldn't have somebody who represent me who would interact with people that way, that offensive, and that's to me is the saddest thing.
Yeah, I agree. Look, when people don't realize that when you're the outsider, and you're the disruptor, right? And you could throw whatever you want at the establishment, and then you could take that wrecking ball and knock things down and destroy things. But what happens when you become the establishment, right? You can't run the operation the same way as a disruptor. You have to run as the government. And people keep missing that, right? Where like Trump has no plans. The thing that really pisses me off about Trump is like, I'll just take care of this. I'll make us the best economy. I'll do this. I'll solve the war between Russia and Ukraine. But how? He has no plans. Of build a wall. Okay, fine. Build a wall. And what do you do about the people in this country? What do you do about all the sanctuary cities? What do you do about the migrant crisis when there's millions of people in this country? How long is it going to take to build a wall? What are we gonna have a special effect here? We're going to build a wall like quickly. It's going to take years. So the guy is very myopic. He has no ideas. He keeps repeating the same stuff. But at the end of the day, I can't agree with you more. There's a lack of civility. I mean, if you disagree with Trump, he bullies you, whatever. But imagine if someone attacked his kids like that. Imagine if someone attacked him like that, right? I mean, he doesn't like all the prosecution he's facing. I think it's kind of interesting, right? He can't handle that stuff. He feels like it's unfair. Why is it unfair? Why is it unfair? I mean, he puts himself out there. He did what he did. He has the ability to retain counsel. He did. He could pick people. The problem is, he's got to pick who he's got to pick, because, like I said, people don't want to work with Trump. That was another thing that came to me, too, in 2020 was, maybe we didn't have the best people working with the campaign. And that was 2020. Now, 4 years later, and that was before January 6th. What about January 6th? right? You're going to have even further narrow pool of people who want to support this guy and get behind him. So look, I'm for liberty. I'm for what is the best for this country. I really wish we had another Republican candidate and not Trump, because I think the decision would have been, or the choice would be a lot easier for people. I watched Dave Portnoy the other day, who did a rant, which I thought was interesting, about Kamala Harris, that she's running as an outsider to change things, but she's the vice president, and she's not been able to kind of square that circle about how she can change things if she's, again, part of the establishment, if she's going to be a disruptor. If she's part of the establishment, she disrupts herself. She's not been able to articulate that. Nonetheless, you got to think, why is she running so close with Trump? Whether you look at the prediction models or you look at the polls, it's close, right? For such a weak, inexperienced candidate, or she's VP, she's a pretty weak candidate. But yet, my supposition is that if it was any other Republican candidate, DeSantis, Vivek, you pick whoever you want, Nikki Haley, agnostic, they would be beating Kamala by at least 10 points in the polls right now. The reason that it's this close is because of Trump, and it's an election about Trump, right? So this election is whether you're voting for Trump or you're voting against Trump. It's not about Kamala Harris. And if it was a different candidate, and I think this country deserved a different candidate, right? What are we just about? Clintons, Bushes, and now Trump's? We deserved a different candidate. We had a different candidate. We had a younger candidate, not one who's 78 years old, right? I mean, he looked younger, than Biden, because Biden's a couple of years older, but Biden looks feeble and old, but Trump's, is older. What about having a younger candidate who has some different ideas? So I think the Republican Party missed the boat. I think MAGA is not Republican. I think Trump is not a conservative. I think Trump is Trump. I'm not a big fan of his nationalism as well. I think it's kind of crazy. I don't think every Republican, traditional Republican, is a neocon. I mean, it's just, the name calling needs to stop, right? I have a big problem with it in terms of, like, I feel bad for young kids today, and like you said, the President of the United States, former president, is calling people names, you disagree with them, whatever. I mean, what do you do if a teacher gives you a bad grade? Do you go home and complain to your parents, and they hire a lawyer and they claim that the teacher's discriminated against you because they don't like the way you look, they don't like your name, they don't like your ethnicity, they don't like something? I mean, when are we going to accept reality? When are we going to move back to civility? It's an election, right? It's politics, right? It's like the Yankees are in the playoffs, the Mets are in the playoffs. Your team wins or loses, great. We don't need to hate each other about it. It's like, you're on one side of the aisle or another, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of, flack from a lot of, Republican MAGA people that I know. Why are you against Trump? Whatever. I'm able to express my mind. Hopefully they have enough respect for me that, I have the guts to come on here and explain to you how I feel. And I think I articulate it pretty well. It's just not just something I thought about, last night in preparation for the show. I've thought about this for years, and I've kind of bounced it off of people like yourself that are a lot smarter than me, and have different kinds of backgrounds. And I'm where I'm at. And I'm sure there's a lot of people like me that are fearful of expressing their opinion because they don't want to be ostracized by the MAGA community, because they feel comfort in that, going to the, Trump event, waving a MAGA flag, and then have the red hat and the whole thing, which I think is, kind of cultish and weird, right? Like I'm at the point where I think Trump is a joke, and I think Trump, win or lose, will be a joke, and it'll be proven out. History will prove it. History has proved it already, and I think that people really need to consider, voting for Trump or not, and the fact that Kamala Harris is a flawed candidate, no doubt, but I just think Trump will destroy this country because, one, he has no idea what he's going to do. And most importantly, the people who gave him a shot the first time will not give him a shot the second time, in terms of, you need the swamp, right? Without the swamp, right, you don't have DC. And I'm not talking about the institutional swamp. I'm talking about, you need people who show up at work in the government, right? You're the CEO, effectively, of the biggest corporation in the world, right? And the most important, powerful corporation in the world, right? You need to keep the cogs in the wheel moving, right? If there's any kind of interruption with somebody who works at Social Security Administration, people are not going to get their benefit. If there's certain, any government office where there's a problem, we're going to have disruption in the government. And we look at FEMA and that kind of thing, right? People are not going to want to work for this guy because he pisses people off. He's buffoonish, and he calls people names, and he just, he doesn't know how to act professionally. So what's my point? My point is, when I go to court and I represent someone, I might totally disagree with a judge. But I'm very professional. I call them Your Honor. They call me counsel. I call them judge. I'm very respectful. I mean, the judge and their last name are Your Honor, right? I had this case I did, this bankruptcy case, and it was virtual, and I was home, and it was like I was on my bed. I had all my papers around me, and I thought I was going to have a compliance conference, and this judge is like, no, I want to talk about the case right now, and I really, was not happy about the judge who wanted to talk about the case. So the judge went into the case, and I explained 3 different ways to the judge. And the judge says to me, counsel, look, I see what you're doing, but I'm not going for it. I see what you're trying to do. I'm not going for it. And I got really pissed off and super pissed off. And like all these thoughts and, went in my head. And boy, I wanted to say some things to this judge. He's like, do you have any further questions, counselor? I said, no, Your Honor. Thank you for your time. And I hung up the phone. He denied my motion. And I just laid in my bed, staring up at the ceiling for like an hour. My juices were flowing. I was so pissed off, right? But you know what? It taught me a lot because I realized it's not going to go my way all the time. And I didn't have a 100% super strong case. The point is, I respect the judge. I don't respect the judge's decision, but I respect the judge in his position. And I'm in no position because I respect being a lawyer and the practice of law and someone who serves on a judiciary who can make a lot more money as a lawyer than as a judge. That I respect the process. So my point with Trump is you want to run for president, you got to act like the president, look like the president, say what the president says, and be respectful of the presidency, right? And he's done none of that. And that to me is the ultimate disgraceful thing about Trump, right? You can't change the presidency. You can't change the history of this government. Trump is honestly, Trump is low IQ. People don't realize this. He went to University of Pennsylvania. He went to Fordham. Look up his background. And then he transferred to Wharton. And he talks about it as if he's like some genius, right? He's not a super smart guy. He says the same stuff over and over again, right? And I want to see the movie The Apprentice. I've not seen it. It looks pretty good. But it was trained by Roy Cohen, and he always talks and he says something 2 or 3 times, and he frames things out with his hands all the time in a square. Uses these visual techniques and stuff. I mean, he's just a traditional person that learned this methodology that worked well in New York in the 70s and 80s in the real estate market. But he's a dinosaur right now. He's 78 years old, and he just doesn't. I feel like he doesn't resonate with what's great and amazing about this country. Make America great again. I think America's great now. Why do I have to bring it back again? We need to fix some things now, but who's better than America? What country's better than America right now? Why do we have all the migrants? Why are these people dying to cross the Rio Grande and getting into this country? Why do we have an immigration problem? Because this country sucks. If this country sucks, why would so many people want to come here? Obviously, there's a lot of countries that suck a lot more than us because there's people coming in here constantly wanting to come in here legally and illegally, right? So make America great again. I mean, and he stole that from Reagan. I mean, Reagan said that, years ago in the first term. It's like he's just dated. I did a focus group on Fox Digital for the debate, and I said, to me, Trump reminds me of an old suit. Right, he's like an old suit that you have in a closet that you never threw out. Right, maybe it has like a wide lapels or the color or something like that. He's just like an old suit that's not been modernized, And like everybody kind of knows him, and went down the escalator in 2015 and whatever. I mean, it's like we could do better in this country, and I think as a person, he's probably not that bad as a person as he is a political figure. But I don't agree with his style, and I'm an aggressive guy. But again, I respect the system and the process, because the system and the process is more important than us, right? I mean,
I agree with that.
The system and the process are much more important.
And a president, and ultimately, we talk about a president is a fiduciary. So ultimately, when you're a good fiduciary, understands nothing is about them. Okay, it's all about the people that they represent and their interests, their needs, their desires, their wants. That fiduciary become irrelevant, because the only thing they as a fiduciary, they don't represent. When you're a principal, you represent yourself, like Trump does. He runs the Trump organization. He's a principal. It's his name on it, and everything that does reflects upon him. And he's the principal, and he can do whatever he believes is in his interest because it's representing him. And everybody that works for him, they understand that everything they do reflects upon him. So everyone who goes to work understands that the Trump voters, as they should, that every action that they take, everything they do reflects upon him because it's got his name on the door. It's his business. He's the owner. So when it comes to now the country, for the first time in Trump's life, he's not a principal. He's an agent. So nothing is about you when you're an agent. It's all about the people you represent. So it's never about because your only job is to represent other people. You don't represent yourself. It's not about you. Being a fiduciary is a selfless responsibility, okay, as opposed to representing yourself as a business, which is a selfish responsibility. So to be a leader, to be a fiduciary, you have to be selfless because nothing is about you. It's about the people that you represent. And I think everybody, you're a lawyer, you understand that. When you represent a client, it's not about you, it's about the client. When you go to court, everything that you do, you understand reflects on your client, correct?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Where's the people? Where are the people being represented by Trump and the Trump administration? We the people. Where how are those people viewed? Like what's their perspective? What about liberty? What about individual liberties and freedoms? Where's that being mentioned? Where's that being discussed?
Even when people talk about the success of the administration, again, I'm trying to look at it from an objective point of view. When you say you created the greatest economy in the history of mankind, you would think that the U.S. economy outperformed the rest of the world. So when Trump became president, when the economy that Obama handed off to Trump, the U.S. GDP was about 25% of global GDP. When Trump left office, U.S. GDP was about 25% of global GDP. So how could the U.S. have had the greatest economy in the history of mankind when the U.S. economy, relative to other economies, did not outperform other economies?
Right.
Because if you know a little something about math, if the U.S. economy outperformed the global economy, its percentage of global GDP would have gone up, but Absolutely. It didn't go up. So basically, the U.S. performed comparable to everyone else in the world. So maybe every other leader could make exactly the same claim that Trump made, that if their economy grew during about the same period of time, during those 4 years as the U.S. economy did, that maybe all of them could say they were responsible for having the greatest economy in the history of mankind. So now, when Reagan was president, the U.S. economy, I think at one point in time, its GDP prior to the Baker Accords, when Reagan decided to abandon the strong dollar policy, that the U.S. economy was about 32% of global GDP. Very, very different than 25%. The last time I checked it, and I haven't gotten much updated numbers, but right now the U.S. economy's percentage of global GDP, the last time I checked, was higher than it was when Trump left office. So that the U.S. has outperformed other economies, these last 4 years, and supposedly that's a terrible economy. But that's what happens when you make claims that you don't. I'm somebody that believes is like when you go to court, you have to present evidence. I think I'm a person that when people make statements who work for me, when they make a claim, I need to know where that claim came from. What's the data? What's the evidence that they have behind those claims? So if someone tells me it's the greatest economy ever, I would say, okay, what's the metrics that make you assert to that claim? So every claim needs to have a citation behind it, because other than that, it's just bullshit and noise. So right. When anybody has a fact or anybody makes a statement or anybody makes an assertion, they can either say I'm speculating, they could say it's just my opinion, but even if they say it's their opinion, my next question is where does that opinion come from? What's the evidence that you put together? What's the data you aggregated? Okay, what's the analysis that you performed to make those claims? So I don't just let people make claims and then accept them because of who they are, so that whatever claim they make is not subject to scrutiny. every claim. We should be skeptical about everything everyone says.
Agreed.
Okay,
Agreed.
including the things you're saying today and the things that I'm saying today. Everybody
100%.
should be skeptical of everything that people say, and they should look to validate everything as much as they can, so that they can be informed voters making informed choices. And the likelihood that candidates will say bullshit if people fact check them. It's not the job of BitChute or Twitter or any other group that thinks it's their responsibility to fact check people. No, it's the individual's responsibility to fact check
Agreed.
people. If we want a society of self-government, if we want to sustain the republic as Ben Franklin said, it's our job to do. That's what's responsible for us to do. We all have to become fact checkers. We all have to demand more that in any statement, whether it's from Kamala or Trump, that we need to hear what's behind that statement. Why are you saying those words? Where's the proof? Where's the evidence? As the commercial used to be, where's the beef? So we have to say that. And normally when people have no citations, then you should basically assume when people have no citations that the best thing for me is I just assume they're full of shit. So unless somebody can back up their claims, I just consider it noise, and I consider the speaker just as somebody being full of shit. So, and being somebody who negotiates a lot of business deals, I think I'm pretty good at having a pretty good bullshit detector. So, and as you know, being a lawyer, you have to have a good skill for basically determining when people are full of shit, because you're representing your clients in many negotiations and many transactions, many deals. And, ultimately, you're not really relying upon the document. You're relying upon your assessment, of the other person. So I've been told, by people that when they negotiate with me, I'm a pain in the ass to negotiate with, and I'm a pain in the ass to negotiate with, probably because I use the negotiation for extensive discovery. I ask a lot of questions, and I ask the same question multiple ways because I'm trying to learn as much about that person, because I don't want to rely upon the document. I want to feel I know that I know my counterpart and that I understand how they think. So what I want to do is I want to mitigate the probability that I will be surprised. So that's what I want to. I want to avoid surprises. So if I ask a lot of questions and I ask good questions and I'm a good listener to those good questions, then I can basically predict how that other person behaves. But I have to be someone who's really good at asking questions, and I can only ask good questions if I'm a good listener. And I guess as a lawyer, you have to have the same attributes.
You have to listen. I mean, I was a bad listener for years, and then practicing law, you have to learn to listen. So you gotta listen more than you talk. And the problem with Trump is, I mentioned I'm a big sports fan, right? And you look at Mike. I'm fascinated by Mike Tyson, right? Like, was an amazing boxer, but is an interesting human being. Analysis of a human being. If you look at his life, kind of like similar to the Raging Bull, Jake LaMotta, right? It's the movie is about the destruction of man. He was a boxer at one point in his life. It's not a movie about boxing. It's a movie about a destruction of a guy's life. So Tyson, had Customato and Jacob, some of these people around him, and made him Tyson. And we got to the point where we just fought. Cuss died, Jacobs died. He hired all his friends from Brooklyn. One guy became his trainer. One guy became his manager. One guy became his accountant. I'm not sure he was an accountant. One guy became his lawyer, whatever. And, went to Tokyo, lost to Buster Douglas. It was like never the same, right? And the problem is he had a bunch of, they were men. He had a bunch of yes men around him because they wanted to go to the club. They wanted to party. They wanted fun. They were like enablers of Mike. And Mike was his own worst enemy. And, he admits it right now. It's like a trainer has to kick your ass. So your coach has to kick your ass and tell you where you need to improve and that kind of thing. You've got people around you who are just yes men and women, you're never going to improve. And that's what Trump has, right? Trump never had anybody around him who disagreed with him, right? So you got to think about that in terms of a leader. A leader, a CEO, right, isn't an expert in every single thing, right? Jamie Dimon, like Jamie Dimon or not, right? Chase is an interesting firm. Jamie's got a lot of great people that work for him, under his supervision that could take his place when he retires, whatever that may be. But the point is Jamie or any other CEO, Elon Musk or something like that, he can't be all knowledgeable on every single thing. He has to delegate authority and responsibility. mean, I felt like Trump ran the presidency like he ran his business. You know, his daughter, his son-in-law, Omarosa, people from The Apprentice. I mean, it was like a joke. You can't run the federal government like you're running, you know, Trump Tower. So in the Trump organization, right? And, you know, selling water and whatever else he's selling, you know, coins. And, you know, now he's doing a shit coin now, you know, he's involved in a shit coin as well. I'm sure you're aware of it, you know, so it's like, it's like, imagine George Washington doing such crap. I mean, Reagan, you know, made Bedtime for Bonzo, all those movies before he became president, right? He wasn't shilling crap, you know, while he was running for president, right? I mean, it's just, you know, and then pimping out the White House or the Trump Hotel, you know, to, you know, the emollients clause in the Constitution. I mean, you know, that's never been really investigated. But the guy, you know, the Secret Service would stay there and spend, I don't know, $800 a night or whatever. And like, he made so much money from being president. It's kind of disgraceful. So people need to do their research. Like, people should not listen to me, you, whatever, and, you know, do their own research, form their own opinions. But the stuff is there. People choose to not look at it, that, you know, look for it, review it, study it, analyze it, as far as I'm concerned, because people are already convinced in their head to go a certain way based upon what this guy's saying, and he doesn't even know what he's saying sometimes.
That's fun. I was laughing when you were talking about, like, you know, leaders having. I started my first business when I was 24, and I didn't really like managing people. I had enough trouble managing myself, so it was trouble enough trying to manage myself that if I can't manage myself, how can I manage anyone else? But I knew there were certain core principles that were important to me with anyone that worked for me. So the only way I could trust people is if people were willing to tell me the truth. And how was my test of someone's willing to be truthful to me? Was willing to disagree with me. If somebody's agreeing with me all the time, then they're probably not truthful with me. They're just playing me. So, you know, so I at least I had many vices, and I have many vices, but one of them is not that type of hubris. So when I hired people, you know, I would tell them, I said, if you ever come to the office, don't ever have a conversation. The only time you're ever entitled to speak with me are under 3 conditions. Okay, one is if you need help with something that I know something about. Okay, now if you ask me to help you something that you know I can't help you in, then you're just kissing my ass, and I don't want to do that. So learn to ask the right person for help, and you should know what I can help you at and what I can't. So don't waste my time. Second, okay, if you disagree with me, I want to hear from you. If you need help, I want to hear from you. If you think I'm behaving like an asshole, I want you to call me an asshole, okay? But I never want you to come in to tell me how much you like my tie, how my suit is very nice, how you agree with me. If you ever agree with me, okay, if you ever tell me how smart I am, how good I look, you know, anything that's a compliment, I'm firing you, okay? Because I'm assuming you're full of shit, okay? So the only time I can trust you're not full of shit is when you're telling me stuff you think I don't want to hear, which is why you think I'm wrong or why you think I'm an asshole, okay? Or when you think my specific skill set can be helpful for you doing a certain task. So people came in and nobody ever complimented me, because I really would have fired anyone. If they would have said any one of my employees that ever would have tried to say anything nice about me, I would fire. Okay, not that I didn't have some virtues that are worth complimenting on, because I'm sure I did, but I didn't want to hear it. Okay, I have to make myself feel good enough about myself. You know, I don't need people to make me feel better about myself. I'm responsible for feeling good enough about myself on my own, you know, to not need to be stroked by other people. What I expected other people was for me to trust them, and I felt I could trust them if they could tell me why I'm an asshole, or they could tell me why they think I'm wrong, you know, or are going to help. So and that way you tend to get better people working for you, because the best people don't want to have to kiss somebody's ass.
Right.
The best people want to be able to be who they are. They want to be authentic. So I wanted people to be authentic. I didn't want people to ever think, oh, gee, I'm worried about Jeff's opinion about me. Okay. I didn't want them to give a shit about my opinion about them. So I just wanted them to do their job and to enjoy doing what they're doing, and to feel that they never had to repress themselves of anything that they felt or say, you know, unless it was positive towards me. Then I didn't want to hear it, because then I would stop trusting them as much. So I think maybe I was a little unusual in that way, because I never wanted to be complimented. So, and I immediately distrusted anyone who did. But yeah, but you tend to get the best people if you let them express themselves.
Sure.
If you let them be who they are, if you let them be authentic, the best people generally have pretty big egos, and the best people have a lot of self-confidence, and you got to let them shine. And it's got to be. I always say, in a room, there's only a volume of space out there, and if your ego takes up the whole space, then there's nobody else's space for ego. So as a leader, you got to try and take the least space in the room, because you got to leave most of the space for all the people who are working with you and for you. And to me, I think that's a good leadership skill. And I think with that, you get the best people working for you. And I think, really good people used to like, working for me, despite my many abundant character flaws. So, because ultimately I let them be who they were, and they knew as a fiduciary on their behalf that I was committed to their success, and I wasn't just focused on them creating a success for me. I wanted them to create a success for themselves. So if they created a success for themselves, I would benefit from the fact that I would be a collateral beneficiary of them creating success for themselves. So, but I still really don't like managing people. So I think telling people what to do, is something I don't really like. As an anarcho-capitalist, you don't want to be telling other people. You want relationships to be peer-based relationships where everybody's an equal, that nobody's really a boss, and everybody has the same opportunity of expressing themselves and the same opportunity of being heard. So freedom of speech and freedom of reach. So, Manny, now we've talked, and you want to do a podcast. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so you're going to be hosting a podcast here on BitChute?
Yes.
Can you tell people, so we can wrap this up, can you tell people about the podcast you want to do? Do you have a name for it? Do you have a theme? Do you have topics that you want to discuss? How regularly going to do it? Why don't you describe to whoever might be listening to this now or might listen to it later, what your intentions are with the podcast that you're going to host?
Sure. I'm thinking about calling it Manny's View or Manny's Point of View. And I want to talk about some topical things. I mean, clearly want to talk about the election, but from an interesting perspective, kind of like I hope the viewers, appreciate kind of the discussion today. I thought it was a bit different than what you generally hear. But I want to give my point of view, and people could agree and disagree. I'll have different people on. Some people would agree with me. Some people disagree with me. But also want to talk about, interesting topics, right? So politics, but, more than politics. I mean, we could talk about liberties, kind of, current events in terms of what's happening with liberties in terms of, on social media, or, liberties in terms of the media, right? Also talk about, the economy, maybe get into some of the, Bitcoin type discussions in terms of, or you look at the regulation by enforcement, the SEC. I think it's kind of interesting what's happening right now with regard to the SEC going after a lot of these platforms that, seemed kind of untouchable a couple of years ago. And, what's happening in the space, right? Will there be convergence in the crypto community to like a traditional capital market setup, or, will you still have a Coinbase, a Kraken, that kind of setup. So those are really the topics I want to talk about. Stuff that's interesting, really, most importantly, stuff that nobody else is really talking about. So, I know people heard about, the election and ballot harvesting, whatever. I'm not sure if people really heard, some of what my point of view in terms of someone who was involved to some extent, and kind of, what I saw and kind of what I felt. But I really want to have a candid conversation with people about Trump and about the election, and kind of no holds barred. So kind of like the WWE without, slamming a chair over somebody's head.
So what do you have a date on when you want to get this started?
I'd like to start, I could probably start in November, give myself a couple of weeks, come up with some things, and, really flesh things out, get some guests. I think I could get some interesting guests to come on and kind of go at it with me. And I like discourse as a lawyer. I like debate. I listen as much as I like to hear my own voice. And, I think there's a lot to talk about. And look, one of the things that, I remember growing up as a kid, to mention my family's from Italy, every Sunday we'd have Sunday dinner, and, everybody had a voice at the table, and a lot of people spoke, and we aired shit out then. That's where stuff came to bear. A lot of people from a lot of different parts of the world, right? Like, we don't eat anymore, like as a family, but we sit at a table and you have a dinner and you have a long dinner, you air it out, you get shit out, you bring stuff up and you hammer it out. You agree, you disagree, you agree to disagree. And I feel like we're kind of in our own little serious satellite radio pockets where, I listen to the music I want to listen to. I listen to the, podcasts I want to listen to. And there's never any kind of cross culture, right? Where there's like a cross reference between maybe getting into a discussion with someone who disagrees with you and maybe learning something from them. Maybe they'll enlighten you and you'll enlighten them. And maybe you'll get some converts either way. I think we're just so dug in. So I'm all about having a discourse. I'm all about having discussions with people that you maybe not think I want to have a discussion with, or they want to have a discussion with me. I think that makes it interesting. Kind of like the old William F. Buckley firing line with Gore Vidal. I mean, I still love that stuff. That's really stuff that piqued my interest when I was a kid. Where you look at William F. Buckley, the way he would debate people. I mean, he had a lot of people on the show that, completely hated their guts and hated him. But it made for interesting viewership, and made for interesting TV, and also made people learn, because it was a debate and people got into it. I mean, we're in, Kamala Harris says what she says and people just nod their head like a bobblehead. And then Trump says what he says and then people nod their head. And then there's, outside of debate, you never see, or if Trump supporters engage Harris supporters, they're screaming and they're fighting, whatever. There's no like interesting kind of dialogue in respectable, Robert's rules, kind of like, decorum, and like, let's hash it out. So that's really what I want to try to instill, is for people to not be so fearful to express their opinion. Number one, especially if you're a conservative and you might disagree with Trump. And, maybe if people are Harris supporters, but they don't 100% agree with Harris, it's fair too. It's fine. It's okay. It's okay to disagree. Totally okay. That's what this country's founded upon. Discourse, debate, and agreeing to disagree. But I don't think we have a lot of that right now.
Yes, you have to disagree in an agreeable way. I think that I used to watch pretty regularly Phil Donahue, and he had great guests on.
Oh, yeah.
I remember the interviews he did with Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman. So when he certainly was not philosophically aligned with them, but he had them on for a full hour of their show and really had very interesting conversations. And I think everybody, whether they agreed with Milton Friedman or Ayn Rand, left listening to those conversations a lot smarter. And I think a great thing about Phil Donahue is he really let people talk. So he didn't just use the show to talk about his point of view. His point of view was clear, and he made it clear. But he was fair to, in my opinion, he was fair to his guests, and he gave them an opportunity of expressing themselves using their own words with ample time to express their own words. And I have a lot of respect for that. I'm used to nobody agreeing with me, because you don't run across many anarcho-capitalists. So people might believe in one government, Republicans, Democrats, they might have their arguments over that, but my belief in the complete absence of government, I don't think I have one friend who shares my views. So yet we really have a lot of mutual respect for each other. So I don't make it a requirement for anyone to. And I don't know if you've ever attended my lunches in New York that I used to host. I think I
did. Yeah, I think I went to 102. Yeah.
Yes, and so there were people from all points of view at those lunches, and it was a very civil. Everybody, people stayed for 3-4 hours, and people loved those conversations, of the lunches, and there was no unanimity of point of view. One of my friends, who's a journalist, told me, that she says a lot of people talk about what I did, but I'm the only one she knew that was actually doing this, of getting people together. And what I was hoping was exactly that, was to promote, ultimately conversation should not produce agreement. What it should produce is better understanding of each other. So that should be the objective of a conversation, is not to get somebody to agree with you, is to is to try and understand that person better, and hopefully that person will use their conversation with you to understand you better. So I mean, so I look for mutual understanding. I don't look for agreement. I just, I'm satisfied that there's mutual understanding. So I never expect agreement. I'm never going to convince anyone to be an anarcho-capitalist. So I've convinced a few people to buy Bitcoin, but I've not convinced anyone to be
That
an
was good.
anarcho.
That was good advice. That was good. That was good. That was a good convincing there.
Yeah. So Manny, you'll let me know so we can make sure that the people who listen to that we can make sure that on BitChute we let people know the date of your first
Yes.
podcast and who your first guest is, so we can make sure that it's announced that you're doing this podcast, and I hope that from this now almost 2.5 hour conversation that people should be able to judge that you're very good at conversation, that you have a lot of very interesting points of view, that you're very fact based, and that you're clear when you're giving an opinion, and those are attributes that I have a lot of respect for, and I think people should have been able to have an opportunity of making very positive judgment about you. Maybe not about me as someone, as a host and an interviewer. I'm still trying to, as you know, when we got to meet, basically when I went to conferences, I was a keynote speaker. So, usually I was just accustomed to giving a monologue and people just listening. And I too often break into that habit of giving a monologue and just speaking. So hopefully you think I've been fair to you during this.
No, you were great. This was great. I really appreciate taking time. I really enjoyed this. I hope the viewers enjoyed it as well.
I enjoyed it very much. You're a great guest. I'm
Thank you
really
so much.
happy, and I'll be looking forward to watching your podcast when it begins, and hopefully a lot of people will watch your podcast. And thank you for this time and the patience that you've had during this period of time.
All right, absolutely. All right, thanks a lot. I'll talk to
Bye,
you soon.
Manny.
Thanks. Have a great day. Bye now. Bye.